Picture this. It's the middle of winter. The year is 1325. A castle sits high on a hill, its stone walls cutting through the fog like the bones of a sleeping giant. The sky is pale gray, the fields below silent and white. Inside the fortress, the air smells of smoke, tallow, and wet wool. The great hall has gone quiet. The servants have finished their duties, and the last of the torches flicker weakly against the cold stone. But in the heart of this fortress, in a chamber guarded by tapestries and thick wooden doors, the king is preparing to sleep. And if you were to step inside that room, you might expect warmth and comfort. After all, this is a king. He rules lands, commands armies, and feasts on golden plates. Surely he sleeps like royalty. The truth, though, is far colder, because no matter how grand the castle, no matter how heavy the crown, the medieval winter spared no one, not even the king. We think of castles as symbols of power, solid, impenetrable, eternal. But in reality, they were also some of the coldest buildings ever lived in. Those thick stone walls we admire today were perfect for defense, but terrible for comfort. Stone doesn't just block the wind, it absorbs the chill. At night, it holds the day's frost and breathes it back into the rooms like a ghost. In winter, even the grandest chambers were frigid. You could hang meat on the wall and it would stay cold for days. Ink froze in inkwells, candles sputtered, and when you spoke, your breath hung in the air like mist. Now imagine lying down to sleep in that. For ordinary peasants, the cold was just part of life, but for a king, it was something else. A problem to be solved, a challenge to outwit. And medieval royalty developed a surprising number of tricks to survive the night without freezing to death. The royal bedchamber was the center of that battle, the warmest, most guarded, most sacred space in the castle. But let's be clear, warmest doesn't mean warm. It just means less deadly than the rest. A typical medieval castle was built for defense first, comfort second, or perhaps comfort never. The walls were several feet thick, the windows small and high, and glass was a luxury only the richest could afford. Most windows were covered with wooden shutters or stretched parchment. They blocked some wind, but not much. If the fire went out, the temperature dropped to freezing in minutes. Even the grandest king in Europe couldn't fight the laws of physics. Stone is stone, so the king's chamber was built for survival. It was usually placed deep inside the castle, high enough to be secure, but away from open courtyards or outer walls where the cold hit hardest. The floors were covered with rushes or straw, changed regularly, and sometimes scented with herbs to fight the musty damp smell. And on the walls, tapestries, thick woven scenes of hunts, saints, and battles. Not just decorations, but insulation. They helped trap what little heat there was, softening the echo of the stone. When you stepped into a medieval bedroom lined with tapestries, it almost felt alive, the fabric moving slightly as drafts crept through unseen cracks. At the center of it all was the bed. Forget everything you know about modern beds. This was something else entirely. A royal bed was a work of art and an engineering marvel. Carved from oak, standing high off the floor, often so tall that you needed steps to climb in. The mattress was stuffed with layers, straw, feathers, wool, sometimes horsehair. On top of that went linen sheets, wool blankets, velvet covers, and animal furs. But the true secret weapon was the canopy, the medieval version of insulation. Heavy curtains hung from carved posts, enclosing the entire bed like a tent. When drawn shut, they created a small chamber within the chamber, trapping body heat and blocking drafts. In the glow of candlelight, with the curtains pulled tight and the air thick with the scent of wool and smoke, it must have felt almost safe. Almost, because the cold never really left. It just waited. Before the king went to bed, servants prepared everything carefully. The fire in the hearth was stoked until the stone glowed red. The linens were warmed with heated irons or brass pans filled with embers. Sometimes even bricks were baked in the fire and wrapped in cloth to serve as primitive hot water bottles. Servants ran these warmers between the sheets, turning the bed from icy linen into something that at least didn't sting your skin. Then once everything was ready, the chamberlain would inspect the room, checking the locks, the windows, the fire, even under the bed itself. Finally, the king would enter. He didn't sleep in silence. There were guards stationed outside his door, attendants sleeping nearby on wooden pallets or benches, and the soft crackle of the fire echoing through the room. The idea of sleeping alone simply didn't exist, not even for kings. Fur and fire, it was still cold. That's why kings dressed for bed the way most of us dress for a snowstorm. They wore linen nightshirts, thick woolen robes, caps to cover their heads, and sometimes gloves. Because heat escapes fastest through the head, medieval people slept wearing what we'd now call a nightcap. And it wasn't just for fashion, it was survival. Blankets were layered one after another. Linen, wool, velvet, fur. The weight must have been enormous. Royal inventories sometimes list 10 or more layers of bedding, enough to pin you down like a quilted suit of armor. Under all that, the king would settle in, his breath clouding the air. The fire flickered. The tapestries shifted slightly in the wind, and slowly the room grew still. Of course, not all heat came from fire and fabric. Sometimes it came from company. Kings didn't always sleep alone, but not always for the reasons you might think. It was common for servants, pages, or even close advisors to sleep in or near the royal chamber. Their presence wasn't just symbolic. Their body heat made a real difference. A few extra people could raise the room's temperature by several degrees. In smaller chambers, the heat of just a handful of bodies could mean the difference between comfort and coughing through the night. Even the king's beloved dogs were part of this strategy. Tiny lap dogs, known as comforters, often slept at the foot of the royal bed, sharing warmth and keeping away rats. They weren't just pets. They were portable heaters. Meanwhile, beyond the royal room, an entire army of servants worked through the night. Some kept the kitchen fires burning to prepare early morning meals. Others tended the castle's main hearths, carrying embers from one chamber to another so the fires never went out completely. Fuel was life. Without it, even the grandest castle could turn into a tomb of ice. Wood was precious, and in large castles, forests were managed carefully to supply enough fuel for the long winters. In colder regions, charcoal was used. It burned hotter, cleaner, and lasted longer. It was the servants' unseen labor that kept the king's chamber from freezing solid. And in that sense, warmth was a team effort, a hierarchy of survival. Even the way the castle was designed reflected that struggle. Some later medieval castles experimented with early heating systems. Flues and vents built into the walls to channel warm air from fires below. It wasn't true central heating, but it helped. At Caernarfon, at Dover, even at the great palaces of France, builders learned to trap and redirect heat. A sign that comfort, even for kings, was becoming a kind of technology. But in most castles, warmth came from one source only, the hearth. And that meant a king's survival at night depended on something as simple and fragile as a flame. Let's imagine one of those nights. The wind howls across the moat. The torches gutter in the corridors. In the royal bedchamber, the fire has burned low. Just embers now, glowing red and soft. The king sleeps beneath his furs, the air cold enough to sting his nose. A servant, half awake, rises quietly to stoke the fire again, feeding it with dry logs. For a moment, the flames leap up, casting long shadows on the wall. Figures that dance across scenes of hunts and battles, woven into the tapestries. The servant bows and returns to his mat. The fire crackles. Outside, the snow falls silently. And in that stillness, the king dreams. He's warm, but only barely. In a few hours, he'll wake to the chill, his breath visible in the dawn light. The ritual will begin again. Warm water, hot wine, heavy robes, and the endless fight against the cold. Because the truth is this: no one in the Middle Ages was ever truly warm in winter. Not the peasant by the hearth, not the queen in her silks, not even the king in his great stone fortress. What separated them wasn't temperature, it was how long they could keep the cold away. For peasants, warmth came from fire and bodies huddled together. For kings, it came from servants, furs, and endless preparation. But in the end, both fought the same battle. There's something profoundly human about that image. The idea of a king, ruler of nations, lying awake at night, listening to the wind batter his windows. Maybe his back aches. Maybe his feet are cold. Maybe he dreams of summer or of the small, smoky cottages of his childhood where the fire never went out. For all their power, medieval kings couldn't conquer the elements. Their castles kept out arrows and armies, but not the frost. And so they did what humans always do. They adapted. They built, layered, burned, and bundled. They found warmth where they could, in furs and fires, in the breath of sleeping dogs and loyal servants. And somehow, through it all, they survived. When dawn finally came, the castle would awaken slowly. When dawn finally came, the castle would awaken slowly. Servants opened the shutters, letting in the pale light. The king's robes were warmed by the fire, his breakfast set with spiced wine and bread. The walls still glistened with frost. The stones still breathed cold. But the king had made it through another night. In the end, that was the quiet triumph of medieval royalty. Not just ruling kingdoms, but enduring them. Living through the darkness, the damp, and the cold. Night after night, winter after winter. In a world where comfort was a dream and survival was power. Because in the Middle Ages, even kings didn't sleep in luxury. They slept in defiance of the cold.